The laughter started before I even sat down. My brother raised his glass and smirked. Everyone, let's thank my sister for taking a break from playing nurse to join us today. The table erupted with laughter. My mother smiled. My sister-in-law laughed the loudest. Nobody bothered correcting him. Nobody mentioned the 12 years I had spent studying medicine. Nobody mentioned the thousands of patients I'd treated. To them, I was still the quiet daughter who never made enough money, never showed off, and never mattered. 3 hours later, their son stopped breathing. And suddenly, everyone was looking at me. My name is Dr. Emma Parker, and for most of my life, my family treated my career like a hobby. Not because they didn't know what I did, because they never cared enough to find out. My older brother, Jason, had always been the golden child. If Jason bought a new truck, everyone celebrated. If Jason got a promotion, it became the topic of conversation for months. If Jason hosted a family gathering, people drove across 3 states to attend. Meanwhile, I could work 80-hour weeks helping patients in one of the busiest emergency departments in the state, and somehow it still wasn't considered impressive. To my family, I was simply Emma. Quiet Emma. Single Emma. The daughter who worked at a hospital. Or, as my brother liked to put it, playing nurse. The funny thing was that I never corrected him. I had learned years ago that some people only hear what they want to hear. The trouble started at my brother's annual lake house party. Every summer, Jason invited family, friends, co-workers, and practically half the neighborhood. This year was no different. By noon, the backyard was packed. Children were running around. Music played from outdoor speakers. People laughed around the grills. Boats moved across the water behind the property. I arrived carrying a fruit tray and a small gift for my nephew, Ethan. He was 9 years old, smart, energetic, and easily my favorite person at the party. The moment I walked into the backyard, my mother waved me over.
"There she is," she announced.
Several guests turned toward me. I smiled politely. Mom continued, "This is my daughter Emma. She helps out at a hospital." A few people nodded. One woman asked, "Are you a nurse?" Before I could answer, Jason appeared beside us. He wrapped an arm around my shoulder. "Something like that," he laughed. "Emma's been playing nurse forever." The group chuckled. I noticed the woman immediately lose interest. She turned back toward Jason. Of course she did. Jason owned a successful construction company. Jason had the big lake house. Jason had the expensive truck. Jason was the interesting one. I quietly excused myself and walked toward the patio. A few minutes later, I found myself sitting beside Ethan. He was eating a hot dog while showing me pictures of fish he hoped to catch later. "You staying all day?" he asked. "Probably."
"Good."
He smiled. "You're the only grown-up who actually listens." That made me laugh. I'll take that as a compliment. It is. The afternoon continued. As usual, conversations revolved around money, business, and success. Jason talked about a new project. My sister-in-law discussed vacation plans. Several relatives compared investment portfolios. Nobody asked about my work. Nobody asked about my patients. Nobody asked about anything I had accomplished. And honestly, I preferred it that way. Then I noticed Ethan and several other children heading toward the dock. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Kids were swimming all afternoon. But something caught my attention. The adults weren't paying attention anymore. Most were gathered near the food tables. Others were watching a baseball game on the outdoor television. I glanced toward the lake again. The children were farther from shore now. A little too far. I stood. Jason noticed. "Relax, doctor," he joked. More laughter. "They're fine." I forced a smile and sat back down. But uneasiness settled in my stomach. A few minutes later, I looked toward the water again. One child climbed onto the dock. Another followed. Then another. But Ethan didn't. I scanned the water.
Once. Twice.
3 times. No Ethan. My heart immediately sank. I stood so quickly my chair nearly tipped over. "Where's Ethan?" I shouted. Nobody answered. I was already running. Then a terrified scream shattered the afternoon. A woman pointed toward the lake. And suddenly every face turned toward the water. The second I heard the scream, Every instinct I had took over. I sprinted toward the dock. Behind me, I could hear people shouting. Someone yelled Ethan's name. Someone else was already calling 911. But panic doesn't solve emergencies. Action does. As I reached the edge of the dock, I spotted him, about 20 feet from shore, partially submerged, motionless. Without hesitation, I dove into the water. The lake was colder than I expected. I ignored it. My focus was entirely on Ethan. Within seconds, I reached him. I wrapped one arm around his chest and began pulling him toward shore. The swim back felt longer than it probably was. Every second mattered. Every second felt heavy. When I finally reached shallow water, 2 guests rushed forward to help me carry him onto the grass. The crowd immediately surrounded us. People were crying. My sister-in-law was hysterical. Jason looked completely frozen. I quickly checked Ethan. Then I looked up. I need space. Nobody moved. I said move back. This time they listened. The crowd stepped away. I focused entirely on Ethan. My training had prepared me for moments like this. Not because they were easy. Because staying calm is often the difference between helping and making things worse. I checked his breathing. Checked his responsiveness. Then immediately began emergency care while directing others around me. You. I pointed at a guest. Stay on the phone with emergency services. He nodded. You, I said to another. Meet the ambulance at the entrance. People finally had something to do. The chaos started becoming organized. Jason dropped to his knees beside me. His face was pale. Emma, his voice cracked. Please help him. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry. Because all my attention belonged to Ethan. Several long moments passed. The longest moments of my life. Then suddenly, a cough, a small one, followed by another. The entire crowd gasped. Ethan began responding. Relief washed across dozens of faces at once. His mother burst into tears. Jason covered his face with both hands. A few minutes later, emergency responders arrived. I quickly briefed them on everything that had happened. They placed Ethan on a stretcher and prepared him for transport. As they loaded him into the ambulance, Jason grabbed my shoulder. Thank you. I simply nodded. There would be time for conversations later. Right now, Ethan mattered. The entire family followed the ambulance to the hospital. The waiting room felt completely different from the party. Gone were the jokes. Gone was the laughter. Gone were the comments about playing nurse. Everyone sat quietly. Everyone looked worried. Everyone finally understood how serious the situation had been. I stayed nearby, but mostly kept to myself. The emergency department staff moved efficiently around us. About 40 minutes later, a physician exited the treatment area. Ethan was stable. The collective relief was almost overwhelming. People hugged. Several family members started crying again. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to relax. Then something unexpected happened. A familiar voice echoed through the hallway. Dr. Parker? I looked up. Walking toward us was Dr. Michael Reynolds, the hospital's emergency department chief, one of the most respected physicians in the region. He smiled the moment he saw me. Then his expression shifted to confusion. Doctor, he said, why are you sitting in the waiting room? The conversation around us instantly stopped. Every single member of my family turned toward me, including my mother, including Jason. Dr. Reynolds looked around the room, then laughed lightly. You should be back with us. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Half the physicians in this department trained under you. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the distant beeping of monitors from down the hallway. And judging by the shocked expressions surrounding me, the surprises were only beginning. For several seconds, nobody spoke. My mother stared at me as if she were looking at a stranger. Jason blinked twice. You're a doctor? He finally asked. The question would have been funny under different circumstances. Instead, it just made me tired. Before I could answer, Dr. Reynolds looked genuinely confused. Of course she's a doctor. He glanced around the waiting room. Then his expression changed. Slowly, as if he was beginning to understand what had happened. You didn't know? Nobody answered. Dr. Reynolds folded his arms. Emma has been an emergency physician for over a decade. The room remained silent. He continued. She's also one of the people responsible for developing several emergency response training programs used throughout our hospital network. Jason's jaw literally dropped. My mother looked embarrassed, but Dr. Reynolds wasn't finished. Actually, he said, most of the younger physicians in our department have learned something from her at one point or another. I wished he would stop. Not because he was wrong, because attention had never been something I enjoyed. For years, I'd been perfectly happy letting my work speak for itself. Apparently, my family had never bothered listening. A nurse passing through the hallway noticed me. Her face brightened immediately. Dr. Parker. She walked over smiling. I wanted to thank you again for helping fund the pediatric family room. My mother looked up sharply. What did she mean by fund it? The nurse smiled. Oh, Dr. Parker donated anonymously. I closed my eyes for a moment. There went that secret. The nurse continued. Hundreds of families use that room every year. Before I could change the subject, another staff member stopped beside us. Dr. Parker, congratulations on the state recognition award last month. Jason looked completely stunned now. Award. The staff member nodded. For her work improving emergency preparedness programs. Then he hurried away. The waiting room fell silent again. One revelation after another. One piece of a life my family had never bothered to understand. Finally, my mother spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Why didn't you ever tell us? I looked at her. The answer came easily. Because nobody ever asked. That hurt more than I intended. I could see it on her face. Jason stared at the floor. For years, they had filled every conversation with assumptions. They thought they knew who I was. They never actually checked. A few minutes later, Ethan's physician entered the waiting room. Good news. Excellent news. Ethan was doing well and expected to make a full recovery. The relief was immediate. My sister-in-law cried again. This time from happiness. Jason wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Then Ethan was wheeled briefly through the hallway before being transferred upstairs for observation. The moment he saw me, he smiled. Aunt Emma. Hey, buddy. His small voice was weak but cheerful. Mom said you saved me. I squeezed his hand gently. You did the hard part. He grinned. Then he said something I'll never forget. I want to be like you when I grow up. My throat tightened. That's a pretty big goal. He smiled wider. Good. After he disappeared down the hallway, Jason walked toward me. For once, there was no joke. No sarcasm. No audience. Just my brother. I'm sorry, Emma. I looked at him quietly. He shook his head. For everything. Then my mother stepped forward. Tears filled her eyes. We should have been proud of you a long time ago. Maybe they should have. Maybe they shouldn't have needed a hospital waiting room to see me clearly. But people grow at different speeds. Some lessons simply take longer. As we sat together that evening, I realized something important. The title that changed my family's opinion wasn't doctor. It was the moment they finally saw who I had been all along.